You want to know what I love about this Dr. Stone season? It's the fact that you never quite know where we're going to end up by the end of any episode. I was convinced walking into this episode that we would have at least a few more episodes before they set sail. Hell, I was even under the impression that maybe they would end this cour with them setting sail. We know we're getting a split cour here, so they would come back in a few months and we'd go to the new world. But by the end of this episode, they did it. They actually got here far quicker than I was ever expecting. But it makes sense, right? For some people, maybe they would like it to be slowed down and see every little step. But I think with where we're currently at in the story, there's so many more interesting ideas, and given what they've already invented up to this point, we kind of understand their thought processes, the maps in terms of how they go step by step. So yes, they slowed it down at certain points of the season and showed us how they made things that they'd never done before. But given that we've made cars and smaller boats, I think the only thing they really need to do was explain how they would go from a smaller one to a giant one. And that's where Ryusei comes in with his kind of model hobby from back in his original life. And he was able to make something that was large enough that they could then amplify it in order to make a giant ass boat. And seriously, I mean, you can only dangle the carrot in front of the horse for so long until the horse no longer pulls the cart. And for the anime watcher, they've been teasing the new world, so they needed to set sail sooner rather than later. And the fact that we're going to Treasure Island, the most important spot where literally Senku's father, the first survivors of petrification, survived. I mean, there's so many mysteries. And yeah, that seems like a damn fine spot to end this cour on if you ask me, and then potentially even setting sail even further. Full live reaction to this wonderful episode is available on my Patreon if you do want to see my full uncut thoughts as I watch. This was a really impressive episode because it has so many twists and turns throughout it, and honestly, up until they actually set sail, I was like, there's no way we're actually setting sail. So when the crew is actually assembled, you just kind of feel impressed with where they've gone. I mean, it's the little moments for me where I look at all the steel they've bent and attached to the boat and I'm like, man, rewind to season 1, episode 1, where they're living in a shack, and I thought it was impressive that Senku was mixing some chemicals. Now we're at the point where they literally they're at the manufacturing age. They can do way more than just simple wooden planks. They can literally craft things that are so modern, and it's really impressive. And I love seeing how, there was a legit moment where Senku was being honest. I don't think this was him trying to encourage. I think this was him being honest, like, we have to give up on the idea of a large boat. I need to set sail. We'll make a smaller one and only a handful of characters will go. I fully believe he was convinced there that honestly, unless we have someone who can make a miniature that is to the right scale that we can know how to build this, honestly, it's going to take too long. And the fact that we get the Ryusei backstory where in very rich boy fashion, he's only given a small million, not the 10 million he's used to, so then he invested in stocks. Of course he gets rich like any rich person does in that moment. But I like the fact that you have someone like Francois still stand by him because he has that passion that they can respect, right? And the fact that it then ties into like, no, there's no way that the captain of the ship is going to give up on his big ship. Like, this is what he wants. And I think when it came to the crew assembling, it makes sense, but there was a couple of twists and turns that were fun. I mean, Ginro and Kinro, right? One of which very brave, another a little bit of a scaredy cat. I mean, they kind of twisted and turned in a fun way there because when one doesn't get on board, the other is obviously a little upset that their pal didn't come with them. And truthfully, I thought it was just this powerful moment. He dives in, he's chasing after the boat. I'm like, yep, this is going to be a defining moment for his character. And then when he starts talking like, why aren't they snapping a pic? There's no way they'll hear me. I don't have to actually go. I'll just become the harem king. I'm like, my boy, how scummy can you get? And the fact that he gets his ass dragged on that boat, there was no better way to force a character on that ship than literally him encouragingly saying, you know what, I'll go on no matter what. That was just fantastic. But I think the crew mostly makes sense. There's a couple of fun additions that maybe I wasn't expecting, such as, honestly, again, I wasn't expecting him to go. But then again, if you are going to go into uncharted lands, potentially meet some characters who may not be friendly, a mentalist, someone who's very good at persuading, is definitely a character you want on board. Or probably the most shocking aspects in terms of like new characters jumping on board is the prisoners from the prior season. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Initially, I thought just one of them would stay behind so they had a fighting force, but instead they're like, no, we'll take the prisoners with us, and if we run into trouble, hey, we get some extra fighting forces, because it's not like they can just run away, like they'll also be in danger. I was like, okay, that's actually kind of clever. Also provides a narrative reason for why maybe when they get back home, they no longer need to be in a cell if they prove their worth and value on the ship, right? But in general, there was just it felt like in a lot of ways this could have been the season finale of a Dr. Stone season. And while yes, maybe in another world you could have maybe extended from episode 5 all the way to an episode 11 to get to this moment, but for me, there's just so many more interesting possibilities now that Y-Man's out there, the fact that we're going to Treasure Island where his father and his crew was. I think there's just more interesting things at play, and they slowed it down at the right moments, and they sped through things that I felt like we've already seen similar aspects be built. So to me, it doesn't really feel like rush pacing, but I can see how maybe some people would view it as such, and I've seen some people mention that, but for me, I just don't feel that personally. And honestly, when they started bringing up our reporter who I was like, damn, she feels like she's like a year away from dying. I was like, man, does she have like this illness that we need to revive a doctor to cure? Turns out it's just a lot of fear of like, you know, someone who's basically been tasked at reviving everyone is kind of looking at this potentially being the end. I mean, we may never see these characters again. And the fact that, you know, all those pictures throughout the episode, I think black and white just is such an interesting filter in general. Obviously, they don't have color pictures yet. But I think it just adds to such an interesting history lesson. Like, just imagining whenever this show eventually wraps up, right? Seasons down the line, it'd be so cool to have like a time skip of just like people passing down the tales or teaching of the Senku legacy and showing these pictures of what they were like, and just the fact that something that almost appeared from thin air then became this amazing paradise that we built. The people back on the island are going to continue building and progressing their civilization, where Senku and the team are out there risking their lives to try to cure and find out the mystery of the petrification and potentially undo it. I just feel like Dr. Stone, this is why we love it. This is why it has such a passionate fan base. May not be the mainstream show of a season, but anyone who watches Dr. Stone, they generally talk about it with high praise because there's nothing quite like it. The story, the mystery, the way they just paint Senku as honestly one of the most valuable anime characters in existence. It's just insane to see the value of a man who's turned something into so close to already what we feel like is a modern civilization in the making. And the fact that before his life ends, if he does get to live out a full life, he seriously is going to make it past where he left off in the modern world, and that's insane to think about. The only thing that was a little surprising to me, and is a little worrisome, is I've always said Chrome is probably like, if something happened to Senku, Chrome, while he's not going to be the same mindset as someone like Senku, at the very least, he would still be able to progress things. I mean, he's literally was ahead of his time prior to Senku showing that the rocks he played with were actually pretty important. So him being on the ship, it makes sense for narrative reasons. Obviously, we want to keep someone like that. He's special, he's intelligent, he's needed. But if something did happen to that ship, it does feel like someone like Chrome staying behind would be necessary in order to not completely lose the momentum. But then again, they've done an amazing job with the village. I mean, there are other people who would be willing to still try things, but I think Chrome is honestly similar to Senku, irreplaceable, but that's just me anyway. Either way, this was a great episode. It almost felt like a season finale, and the fact that we still have a good half a season left before we have to say goodbye for a few months before we jump into its split season. I mean, this was a great episode in my opinion, but let me know what you thought down below. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here, ring that bell of course so you can get notified when I upload on the channel. And like I mentioned, full live reaction is available on my Patreon. I also give video shoutouts and other perks like that if it interests you. So until next time everyone, please take care and have a good one.